Some of you may have heard the good news that happened in my family in early September. I became an aunt for the first time. A real aunt. It was my brother's child. And I have to tell you that my nephew, like a good firstborn, kept us waiting. Due August 23rd, my sister-in-law joked that my nephew had inherited his father's dumb yet lovable sense of humor and decided to wait until Labor Day to be born. And he didn't disappoint. It made me, as we were waiting for him, it made me start thinking about this idea of being born and what that entails. Mystics of all religious traditions tell us that we are born the first time around into our physical beings, into our bodies. But that on the journey that is called life, we begin to live out of fear instead of out of love. And that every day we have an opportunity to be born again, to live life out of the love that is our right and our inheritance. It is, as Mary Oliver says, one day you finally knew what you had to do, and you began. Now, I know that a few of you have actually shut off your brains right now because I've just used the whole born again language. It is an actually very useful metaphor that has been co-opted. And so I'd like to borrow Allison and Tim's kick in the pants metaphor to use as a replacement because I think it just works so well. Every day we get opportunities. They are little kicks in the pants that offer us a way to live more fully in this world. And I have to tell you about one of my own experiences. It was just about the time that my nephew was born, I experienced my own. It was early on a Sunday morning in August, and I don't know if you remember August. It felt very different from this September. Not this humid, but it was cool. And the sun had just risen off the horizon, maybe an inch or so, and it was big and bold, and the sky was clear without a cloud in it. And I stepped onto my front porch, and I actually, even though I was rushing, I stepped and stopped. And I felt the coolness of the air and the warmth of the sun, and I just felt it for a moment. Taking a breath, I took a step down on my way to my car, and a thought, crystal clear, came into my head. It said, Emily, if you died tomorrow, you would regret your life. And I have to tell you, it stopped me in my tracks. This little voice, my own voice, a thought. What does this mean? I love my life. I love my family. I love my work. I love the people that I get to be with every day. What does this mean? How can this be true? And as I listened, it was like one of those moments when all your joints seem to align, and I thought, yes, there is some truth in this. What regrets would I have? Because it wasn't that I didn't love my life. It was the realization that I too often live more out of fear than out of my own comfort zone than I do out of love and what love requires of us. That I let busyness get in my own way, that I tell myself I can't when I know I can. I live with a mantra, maybe you do too, to whom much is given, much is expected. And so here I am in this life that I love. What does love require of me? That moment was a kick in the pants. It was a Mary Oliver moment, the day that you finally knew what you had to do. It was Lord Buddha saying, what will you do? This week I was listening to Terry Gross, that great radio interviewer. She spoke with John Field. Professionally, John is a demolition supervisor, and he arrived at the World Trade Buildings at September 12th, 2001. He arrived in order to help in any way he could. Just 5 days later, an 8,000-pound piece of steel fell down from the sky and onto his foot. His foot then became septic, his body became septic as the wound became more and more infected, and John nearly died. The accident cost him his foot, and it cost him his livelihood. He could not work the way he had worked before. And his despair grew deeper when the government denied him medical compensation for his injury. And when he spoke with other first responders, he realized that he was not alone, that others were going through this same trauma, and that trauma was ruining their lives. They were losing their homes, they were getting divorced or separated, their kids were going into rehab for drugs because daddy and mommy were miserable. That moment for John Field was a kick in the pants. He knew what he needed to do. His life had a purpose. The question was he going to answer it? And he decided that he would. He just happens to have a great name. He formed the Feel Good Foundation. His name is FEAL, Feel Good Foundation. And the foundation advocates for emergency personnel, and he eventually pressured Congress to pass a bill that would provide compensation for medical care and the monitoring of first responders. At the end of the interview, John told Terry, you hear all the time that you only live once. Well, that's wrong. You only die once. You live every day. And so I wake up every morning and I make a commitment to really live. Every morning, we are invited to live into love, to truly live. The question, of course, is, will you begin? Will you do what needs to be done? Will you be determined to do the only thing that you can do? These moments of clarity, this happened for me too, these moments of clarity are often quickly followed by voices of doubt. As Mary Oliver says, people keep shouting their bad advice, voices that say you can't, both your own and your others, people that love you, telling you that you probably can't or shouldn't. You will think you're too busy. You will be too busy. You won't know how to take the first step. You'll feel queasy every time you try. You will get tired. You will hit roadblocks, and yet you know what you have to do. Even the Buddha in the story questioned the small child Supriya, saying, "Small child, your heart is filled with love, but how will you do this alone? Your bowl is empty." Your bowl is empty. And that's why I kind of like this born again metaphor. Maybe born again should be born again into new language, because I think it helps us visualize what is required of us. When my nephew was finally decided to be born, it was like a Band-Aid being ripped off. My poor sister-in-law went through 5 straight hours of contractions, no breaks in between. It was a short 5 hours, right? It wasn't 24, but there were no breaks in between. And my brother called me and said it was the hardest thing he has ever had to go through, to watch his wife suffer. But there is a reason it is called labor. It is work. It is exertion. And the thing that kept him in it, that kept her in it, was knowing that they were birthing a love that they had dreamed of, the two of them, for their whole lives. They felt so connected to that vision, so excited to meet this person. I wonder if we can have that commitment to our own lives. In her book, I love the title, "You Are a Badass," Coach Jen Sincero says that she interviewed a whole bunch of entrepreneurs, people who had done amazing things, and she said that the secret to all of their successes was tenacity. Anytime an excuse came their way, they just wore that excuse down. You know what? As I look around this room, I see people in here who are just gifted with tenacity. There are things that I have seen you over the course of the last 12 years start working towards, and as excuses came your way, you had the tenacity to just wear them down. When you are ready to be born, you have to want it. You have to give up the comfort of the womb. You have to give up the certainty that where you are now in order to go where you want to go. And there are no assurances that what you're dreaming of will win. You have to look at an empty bowl, knowing that your neighbors are greedy, and you have to believe that they will fill it. We are living in a time that is kicking us in the pants. How many of you feel it day to day? Just one thing after another. You have some good friends all around you. We've got healthcare, immigration, the death of institutions, North Korea, terrorist attacks, politics, poverty, rising waters, fires in the hills. I talked to Julia Miller the other day, and all of her family was in different places that were either dealing with floods or fires. It is now actually considered traumatizing to watch the news. And yet for those of us who don't watch the news, we are missing out on an opportunity. People like Tim and Allison that I get to meet in our Explorer circles are coming to our community because they feel that kick in the pants, and they need other people to join with them in responding to the time and to our own purpose. I have to tell you that it feels opportune to be standing in this pulpit, the A. Powell Davies pulpit. Anybody know Reverend Davies? Know the story of Reverend Davies? I have to tell you, you have to know his story. He was called the preacher of our nation in the first half of the 20th century, and that's because he was. He was a Unitarian minister. This was before the Unitarian and the Universalists became one. And he, too, lived in a kick-in-the-pants era. He was intense and gifted with such intensity that he slept very little. He just felt so committed to the world he was trying to build. He came to this congregation and the rise of World War II happened, and then he went to Washington to serve the pulpit at All Souls just after the war ended. It was there that he witnessed the U.S. dropping atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and he said, "This cannot happen." He began advocating in D.C. for the adoption of the Atomic Energy Act, which created an independent civilian agency that became the ultimate authority over nuclear technology. A. Powell Davies did that. His congregation did that. He then rallied public support against what he believed were the governmental abuses during the McCarthy era. He and other Unitarians did that. In 1953, Davies launched a successful citywide campaign to patronize only those restaurants that would serve all people regardless of race in 1953. He then pressured the Washington, D.C. Police Boys Club, housed in his congregation at All Souls, to integrate. The club refused and broke off its relationship with the church. And so Davies said, "Oh yeah? We'll create our own." And he created the first racially integrated youth club called the Columbia Heights Youth Club. And it wasn't just A. Powell Davies. It was a whole bunch of people who felt like they were coming together to answer the call of their time. Thousands began to take action, and I am not exaggerating. The numbers were in the thousands to take action on local and on national levels. His sanctuary, which looks so much like ours here, but seats 400 to 500 people, they outgrew it. Back in 1954, they actually had to radio out his sermons into other places. That then started 7 other Unitarian congregations all around the DC area. And now those congregations are some of our largest congregations. And it started because they believed in what they were doing and their voices in that time. Davies once said, "I'm not interested in what you think of the sermon. I'm not interested in what you think of the preacher or of the church or of anything else. I'm only interested in what you are going to do." What are you going to do? Reverend Davies believed in us. He believed in the Unitarian voice and our voice in the world. He wanted us to not hide in our sanctuaries, but get out there and have our voices be heard. He wanted us to take ourselves seriously. Now, I know that I shared with a few of you the story that happened a few years ago, probably just 2 now, of a colleague of mine, a colleague in Summit. I'm going to keep telling you the story until you continue to tell it to other people, because I believe it matters. A colleague of mine in Summit who has been here 30 to 40 years turned to me and said, "You know, your congregation is a lot like George Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life." And I was like, "What? What do you mean?" He said, "You will not know the impact that you have had on this community. You will never know. But I want to tell you, Summit would not be the same city if you were not at the corner of Springfield and Waldron." Sometimes the question is, what would this town be like if we weren't here? My question for us is, what would this town, what would this state, what would this country be like if we magnified our light? It's not about doing our little things. It's about making those small things that we know how to do so well into something that becomes so loud that other people want to take their own light and join us. We make a difference here. Never forget that. What we are doing today is making such a difference. Just this week, there were no chairs in this sanctuary, and there was an statewide immigration task force sitting right where you are. Just this week, the Summit Interfaith Council gathered to talk about the good works that we are going to do, and we were pushing them all the way. Just this week, we invited explorers to come into our congregation to learn who we are. Just this week. Reverend Robin and I believe in you. We believe in our purpose here in this place. And historically speaking, there's only been one thing, really, experts in-house and out of our congregation have told us the same thing. There is only one thing stopping you. It's this sanctuary. It's this comfortable, beautiful space that is a little bit like all of us being Gulliver and trying to manage in this small space. When I worked at Habitat for Humanity, and when I worked with the families there, I watched as with each wall that went up, each nail that they put into their house, they changed. They began to grow into new people. They were becoming something new. And I have to tell you that even though this is a beautiful space, as we watch each wall go up next door, our light is going to be magnified in ways that we cannot even dream about right now. And so that in 15 and 20, 25, 50 years, when you drive by Springfield and Waldron, you will look at that sanctuary next door and you will say, "I built that. We built that." And that's what allowed us. That was our home and our sanctuary that allowed us to live into new ways of being. New ways of being. Let me just tell you a few of those new ways of being. This will become a sanctuary where immigrants who are being threatened by our government will be able to live here and find sanctuary. This is a place where when racism and white supremacy rears its ugly head, that this will be a place where people will gather for vigils and rallies right here. This will be a place when transgender youth have no place to go. They will be able to have their prom here. As the larger world denies climate change, this will be the place where scientists and people of faith come together to build a new way of being. The list goes on. You all have the dreams out there. Bring them in here. This is the home. This is the incubator for all of our dreams. And let me say it again, Reverend Robin and I believe in you. We believe, as Nelson Mandela said to the people of South Africa on his inauguration day, that our deepest fear is actually that we are powerful beyond measure. You ask yourselves, who are you to be brilliant and gorgeous and talented? Who are you not to be? We want you to shine. We want you to be powerful beyond measure, and we want your light to bring out the light in others. My friends, we are the ones we've been waiting for. And so, I don't need to say this. I need you all to say this. My dad, growing up, taught me this great little secret thing that we used to do. He would say one line and I would say another. And it reminded us of the fun and the love that we had with one another. I'm going to teach it to you. When I say, we are the ones, I need you to shout back, we've been waiting for. Are you ready? Yes. We are the ones.
We've been waiting for.
Yeah, you can do better. We are the ones.
We've been waiting for.
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 You're still sitting in your seats. We are the ones. We are the ones we've been waiting for. Come on, stand up. Because this is a dream you have to get behind. When somebody in the hallway says to you, we are the ones, what are you going to say?
We've been waiting for.
When somebody going down to RE says, we are the ones, what are you going to say?
We've been waiting for.
When you are in a committee meeting and somebody is saying, hey, we really can't do this, and you say to them, hey, we are the ones,
We've been waiting for.
there are going to be all sorts of roadblocks on our path, both to build that building step by step and also into our larger dreams of who we can be as Unitarian Universalists. And anytime that roadblock comes, I want you to remember, we are the ones. And I want the reply to be,
We've been waiting for.
You are such good sports.